Hello everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Refuge and welcome to another recommendations video. Now today I'm going to be doing speechless, blind, and deaf characters in romances. Now I am going with the term speechless for obviously characters who can't speak. This is oftentimes in the books referred to as being mute, although I have been informed, as well as I did some research myself as well, that that is not a term that is really appropriate for the people who are speechless or have speech difficulties. So I'm going to be calling these recommendations speechless. If this is a term that you don't think like works or not, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but just be aware, like, I'm trying to use the term that will best work for everyone and be unoffensive, because in the case of disabilities and with people who have chronic illnesses or, you know, things that affect their life every day, I don't want to cause any harm. You know, there are a lot of things that I don't like care about how I come across, but in cases like these, like, I do, because this isn't something really that subjective. Like, there are people who live with this. It isn't like your opinion on it, right? But I do know that, again, each person with a disability or an impairment, they're going to have a different thought about how they care to it being referred to. I am going to be saying speechless, even though some of these books themselves might still use an offensive term. So just know that if you read them and you do find that term offensive, this is a newer thing as far as I can see, where people are trying to change the language. So just be aware that specifically the ones I'm going to recommend, it like does say that they are mute in them, but I'm going to be saying speechless. Okay, enough of a caveat. I'm really excited to do these recommendations. I specifically love reading speechless, blind, or deaf characters. I find that it can lead to some really beautiful romances and connection, because you have the love interest, you know, usually / always finding a way to communicate with that person that works for the both of them and brings them closer together and gives that other character a better understanding of this person they're falling in love with. So also, I want to say there are some pretty conspicuous recommendations that you won't see on this. I was trying to bring forward ones people maybe don't mention all the time, so just be aware of that. I have made a recommendation with characters with disabilities before, and some of these were included in that. And also, other people who've made these videos have definitely talked about the ones that you're thinking of. Archer's Voice. Yes, I know. Everyone in the Sista knows that that has a speechless hero in it, but we're trying to find recommendations that people haven't heard of or read. So I'm going to go through. First, I'm going to do 3 romances with speechless characters. So we're going to do those first. So the first one is one that I actually read recently. Well, actually, these first 2. And they're actually both Mafia recommendations, which is really cool. So the first one is called Kingdom Fall by A. Zavarelli. And this has a heroine who becomes a nanny for a mafia man and his son, and she can't speak. Now, she has some ulterior motives for becoming the nanny for this boy, which I won't spoil, of course, but she uses sign language and she's teaching it to the boy, which is great. He's a very shy, sweet boy, and teaching him sign language gives him like freedom, because he is able to, you know, speak and communicate with her without having to have like everyone know what he's saying. So it's an outlet for him. That's really great. And I really love the relationship between the heroine and this boy in this book. And then, yeah, the hero, he is very suspicious of anyone he lets into his space. He has a lot of strict rules for those people. And basically, like, if you fuck with me, I'm going to kill you, you know? I'm going to unalive you. And yeah, I really liked this one. I gave it about 4 stars because of certain like plot things, and it also was very heartbreaking to find out how she lost her ability to speak. I mean, that's the case for basically all 3 of these ones that are speechless wrecks in here as well. Then there's one that I recently just read, and I know a lot of people are loving this book. It's what kind of pushed me over the edge to make this video too, because I was like, oh, I want to recommend books with this. And that is another Mafia rec, and it's called Broken Whispers by Neva Altaj. This is a beautiful, it's a pretty short romance. It's actually a very low angst romance. And it has a heroine who is speechless because of a traumatic event that she went through. Again, like most of these for this one. And she was a ballerina. She was a dancer. And she has an injury that kind of ends her career very young. She wants to go out on top. Like, she could do rehab and get back in, but she would never be the prima ballerina again. So she drops out. And her father is like, good, you can finally be useful to me. I'm going to marry you off to a Russian to make a peace deal. So she gets married off to a Russian hero who is a single dad who is very like scarred and disfigured because he is an enforcer and torturer for the mafia. So what happens is, like, our heroine is actually offered up, like, the boss of the Bratva, like, he already has a wife, and so he offers this marriage up. He's like, we're going to be making a peace deal with the Italians. They have their daughter that's up for grabs, basically. Which one of my men want to marry her? Now, little does the heroine know that the hero actually has loved her dancing for like the whole time she was the prima ballerina. He would go to every performance of the ballet because he just loved her movements, you know. And he's 10 years older than her. Again, he has a daughter, and he doesn't feel like he's worthy of this beautiful girl. And he also knows sign language, which he does not share right away, because there's a secret reason why he knows ASL that he doesn't share right away. And our heroine knows ASL because she is speechless, obviously, as we've said. But, like, she doesn't have full capability of the language because she doesn't have a lot of people to use it with, which was actually, like, quite sad. And the hero doesn't reveal right away that he knows it. So they communicate mostly through, like, phone and notes and a few other things too. But this was a very sweet romance for the scenario because he basically marries her so no one else can, but he isn't expecting anything out of it. Like, he knows that he's not a real prize for anybody to win. You know, he's really going to give her her own space and, like, stay out of her way. But they're just very much drawn together. And I really loved specifically the romance between these two and how they fall in love. And I also really love his little daughter. She definitely bridges the gap between them. It's really cute. And then the last speechless rec that I'm going to make for this one is Darling Beast by Elizabeth Hoyt. This one is book... Is this book 6 or 7? This is book 7 in the Maiden Lane series. And this one, we have our hero, Apollo, who is currently speechless from a horrible beating that he took in a previous book. And so right now, he finds refuge in the ruins of a pleasure garden, and he's just spending time being a gardener. And so he comes across the young woman who moves in, and her name is Lily Stump. And she moves in there with her tiny, like, band of family and finds Apollo there living and working. And she has a son, and the son really, like, gloms onto Apollo. And so Apollo is someone who his vocal cords will hopefully heal over time because it was a very recent injury that he had. But he is speechless for most of this book, and it was really beautiful. This is a lot of people's, like, favorite in this series. Okay, so next we are going to do some deaf characters. So these are well, okay, you guys know what deaf means, so I won't be like, these are characters who cannot hear. You get that. But, you know, it's different than speechless because a speechless person, they can still hear and, you know, understand English, but they just can't speak it back. And so now I have some deaf recommendations, and these ones are actually all historical. It's funny how that works out. The ones I'm recommending anyway. So the first one I'm recommending is Silent Melody by Mary Balogh. This is part of a duet of hers, but you could read this as a standalone because the duet happens like 10 years before this one. And the heroine is deaf, and since this takes place in the Georgian era, there really is, people think that she is simple-minded, that she is ignorant, that she has the mind of a child. All those derogatory terms that we see, that is very commonly seen in historical romances if the character is deaf or hard of hearing. We'll see that for another rec that I have as well. But she's been able to just kind of live her life very freely. She has a wonderful family. Her sister actually married very well. That is what happened in the first book, is her sister, and then the sister's able to bring her little sister at the time to the home with her husband, and she now doesn't have to worry about being put in an institution or being mistreated, because she gets a loving home with her brother-in-law and her sister. And this is a romance between her and I think it's been a while for this one. I think it's her brother-in-law's brother, I think. But something about her is that he feels like he's able to tell her anything because she can't understand him, or that's what he thinks. But she has learned how to read lips over time, but she very much enjoys her freedom too. So she definitely plays into being more ignorant than she is, which again is a common theme in some of these as well. But I don't know, there's a way that Mary Balogh writes, this was very beautiful, and I love this story. The hero is kind of a dumb nut sometimes in this one. He does have a very traumatic backstory, because our heroine, when she's a little girl, she's kind of infatuated with him. Well, he marries and he's moved away, and in that time his wife and child died, and so he comes back home a much more hardened, heartbroken man than he was when he left. So anyway, yeah, recommend this. And then another one by Mary Balogh that I have is, sorry. I have these marked by which ones are deaf. So there's Silent Melody, and then, so then there is a Joanna Shupe. This one is a Notorious Vow. I actually read this this was the book for a historical romance readathon, the first one I participated in. And this hero is a wealthy, inventor, and the heroine actually is escaping through his garden, and his dog sees her and runs up, and the hero is deaf, but he can read lips very well, and he's trying to invent some technologies that make things easier for deaf people. The thing is that because he's deaf, he's always on the brink of being marked as insane, and there is actually a pretty traumatic part in this book where he's put in an insane asylum for a little bit because his family is trying to challenge his sanity, and so that was very tough. But this one ends up being an arranged marriage because the heroine is trying to escape her parents marrying her off to this horrible man for his money and everything, and he's very old, and the hero is having a wife who knows what's going on, could be good, but he also doesn't want to fall in love with her, all these things. So I enjoyed this book quite a bit. It's one of my favorite Joanna Shupes, but it's not perfect. The third act conflict, I thought, was one of the better ones I've read by her, because a lot of it had to do with outside forces trying to tear them apart. So yeah, that's one for this. And then of course the one that I definitely have recommended many times, but it has to be on this list for deaf heroines because I love it so much, and the hero is so wonderful, and that is Never Seduce a Scot by Maya Banks. And this one has Eveline Armstrong, who is considered touched or simple-minded because when she was a young girl, she was in an accident and she ended up with a high fever, and she woke up not being able to hear. And the king actually orders her family and the Montgomerys to have a truce to figure it out, and the best way to do that is with marriage. And the thing is, Eveline is the only daughter that the Armstrongs have, and Graham is the oldest son, like he's the laird, and so he's not going to like sacrifice his younger brothers into this, because he has heard that she's touched, and so he basically sees it as the king is dooming him to a marriage of not having children and being celibate and being a caretaker to this girl, because he's not going to rape someone with the mind of a child. That's what he thinks, because that's what he's been told. He's been told. And so her family too is like they love their daughter. They haven't really tried to understand her though, so there is some shade in that regards, but they love her and they do not want to hand her over to this man that they see as an enemy. But when Eveline sees him for the first time, he speaks and she can feel his voice. He has this like deep, resonant voice, and she can like feel it. And so she wants to try this marriage with him. She just gets a good feeling about him. And so she makes it clear that she wants to go with him. And once she is in his clan, in his keep, he becomes aware of what's going on here. He realizes she's just as clever as anyone else. She's just as much as a woman as any other woman is. She just can't hear. And he goes about finding ways to speak with her by encouraging her to try to use her voice. That's another thing, is like there's nothing wrong with her vocal cords. She just hasn't been able to hear her own voice for how many years, and so she doesn't try to speak because people don't like the sound of her voice, and that makes her uncomfortable. But Graham really encourages her, and she's like, if you like speak at me, I can understand you, So anyway, I love this relationship. This one also is like, I find what happens in Highland arranged marriages a lot of times, that either the laird loves the woman right away and his keep is against her, or the keep loves her and he doesn't know how to feel about her. This one definitely is the former. Like, Graham feels very protective and loving, and he is very attracted to her. And once he knows that she doesn't have the mind of a child, he's like, I can have a real marriage with her. I'm not going to be assaulting this girl. Like, she wants to be with me. And it's a really beautiful moment, because he sees how beautiful she is, but he would never do anything if she can't consent to it, even though that's not the words used. Like, that's what it is. Like, he's like, if she can't consent to a relationship with me, I would feel disgusting. As you should, right? As you should. But it was beautiful. I love this story. And when deaf recommendations come up, this is always going to be a winner. All right, now I have 4 blind character recommendations. So the first one is one that I just read recently, which also is a reason that pushed me into this, and that is Yours Until Dawn by Teresa Medeiros. This book does have a hero who is temporarily blind. He had a traumatic injury when he was was he a captain, or he was something? I think he was a captain on a naval ship, and he had trauma to like his eyes, so there was like swelling. So this is one where he doesn't stay blind the whole book. Like, I'm kind of sort of spoiling that, but also I don't want anyone to read it and be like, oh, well, now he can see. It is a traumatic injury, but it still is ruining his life. And so this is a bit of like a Beauty and the Beast type of thing too, because we have our heroine Samantha, who is a nurse, and she arrives at Fairchild Park to find Gabriel basically acting like a beast and roaming around his castle, like keeping it dark and hating his life that he's, blind now. And she comes in and starts shaking things up and not letting him pity himself and reconfiguring his home so he knows where things are, and, making him take care of himself better. And slowly they are falling in love, but there is a big secret about Samantha that we don't know. And when I found out, it blew my mind. It was amazing. So I do recommend this book so much. I loved it. Loved it. Then there is another Mary Balogh. See, Mary Balogh, she wrote quite a few books with, you know, either disabilities or impairments. In fact, this whole series is about heroes and heroines with disabilities or mental illnesses or things like that, because it is called the Survivors Club, and it's a group of men and women who've survived the Napoleonic Wars but not unscathed. And so there is a hero who is who can't walk. There are ones with PTSD. There's a hero with a stutter. There's a hero, like, they have all these different issues. So this one is about Vincent Hunt, and he's actually like the baby of the group. He's the youngest. Did I show you the step back of this? And his mother's been encouraging him to marry, and so he was blinded in battle, and so he meets Miss Sophia Fry, and she intervenes on his behalf, and she gets booted from his guardian's home. And so then he is like, well, let's get married. And so Sophia rejects his proposal, but then he persuades her to be his wife, and that she needs his protection from destitution, and he needs a wife that he chooses who will like listen to what he wants. So it's like friendship and camaraderie that leads to seduction and erotic pleasure. Oh, I haven't read this book in so long, but I love this. And I remember in this, like, one of the things that really sticks out is something that's done at his home, because he's blind. So he has like a walking stick, but there's been like a sand path laid out so that he knows where's like a safe place to walk, that's been put, you know, so that he's still able to go on walks like on his own without anyone to help him. And I remember just like thinking that was so clever, and also, you know, ways to give him as much freedom as he can have. And yeah, again, it's Mary Balogh, and she just writes such like gut-wrenching, beautiful romances. Even though, you know, I could wish for more steam, she still writes beautiful like romances that pull at your gut. So I definitely recommend The Arrangement for sure. And I think this one is book 3 in the series, or no, it's book 2. So there's The Proposal, The Arrangement, and The Escape, and then like there's some more in the series too, but these are the beginnings. All right, then we also have Romancing the Duke by Tessa Dare. Won't say too much about this one. This is another one that you will see in many lists. This has a hero who is like, I don't know the exact percentage, but I always say he's like 80% blind, because by the end he does have a little bit of healing where he's able to see some like shapes and shadows, I believe. But this one is a grumpy duke living in a broken down castle, but our heroine, she's been told that she's been gifted this castle in someone's will. So she shows up at this castle, and this is her, like, she is almost destitute. Her father's died, leaving her nothing except the benefits of her father's like fandom for a book series that he'd written. So literally there's like LARPing that happens in this story. So anyway, she shows up at this house and she sees someone still living there. So it turns out that some very like mischievous and cruel people have like sold the Duke's castle out from under him, and they figured there's nothing he'd be able to do about it because he's blind and a recluse, and they're hoping he would die eventually anyway. But our heroine is like, I have nothing else, like this castle has to be mine. And so they both end up like living in this castle and falling in love, and it's beautiful. And then the last one I want to mention is actually a fantasy, and this whole series actually has blind heroes. Now I want to give kind of some caveats to it in a second, but the series is, the first one is the Fae Kings Curse, and the way that this curse works is there's a prequel actually that's called Between Dawn and Dusk that's about the parents of this hero, and they end up pissing off a witch, and she curses the Fae so that every firstborn prince or whoever is the heir in the family will be born blind, and they'll only be able to be freed of this when they find their soulmate and when they kiss and like make love with their soulmate. The only thing is, the way that the Fae recognize their soulmate is they look into their eyes. So this curse that's put on them is they're not able to see, so they can't look into their eyes. And if they get it wrong, if they kiss the wrong person or make love to the wrong person, they'll be blind forever. So they got like one chance. The person that they do the deed with, if it's not their fated mate, then they'll be blind forever. The thing is, a lot of these Fae have like other strength. So I know one of the heroes in this series, again, I'm recommending the first one. The first one actually was my favorite, but they like, a lot of times they have other powers that compensate for their sight. And one of them even has a power where he can like sense everything around him, which in some ways makes sense because your senses do become sharper when you lose one of them. But yeah, I really do enjoy this series. I think there's 3 or 4 books out in it so far, and the first one really was my favorite though too, because the way that time works, so there is a human world that's like our modern world, and then there's Fae, and every day in the human world is a year in the Fae world. And so our heroine, when she is 13, she meets this Fae prince when he's also a young man, and they meet by this river and they play for the day, and he says, I'll be back tomorrow. Well, or she says, I'll be back tomorrow. But for him, it's been a whole year when he comes back to see her, because he has to get this wizard to like make a portal. It's probably not a wizard, I can't remember what it's called. And he's only able to ask for it on his birthday every year. So very quickly, within a week, she goes from like, she's still 13 and he's now an adult. And so there's never anything romantic between them while she's a kid, which it's an interesting choice by the author, because we know that for her, what is like, I believe it's 5 years of seeing him, for him is thousands of years he comes back to see her. Well, a couple thousand, right? Because if every day's a year and it's like 5 years, 5 times 365, whatever, like he's been coming years after years. And when she's finally old enough, she tells him like, I'm gonna be moving away, I won't be able to see you. And he's like, come spend a day in Fairy with me. And he explains like, you could stay with me for months and come visit, and it will only have been like a few hours. And so she agrees, and then he goes about explaining that like, I'm pretty sure you're my mate type of thing. So it's a really beautiful story. I really do like this series. And again, like there's a blind hero in pretty much every one, although again, they do have different things that compensate for their blindness in different books. So anyway, there you go. Those are my recommendations for speechless, deaf, and blind characters and romances. Let me know some of your favorite. Maybe I've read them, maybe I haven't. Love to know. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.